There is a painful truth about Gladys Knight that many fans never expected to face. After decades of lifting the world with her voice, the Empress of Soul now carries a weight far heavier than applause. Behind the public smiles and carefully chosen words, those close to her describe a woman quietly battling the storms of age, family conflict, and shadows from a lifetime of heartbreak. At 80, the reality of how she lives has stunned even those who believed they knew her story. Today, we uncover the truth she never sings about, from a childhood of loss to a voice built on pain. Gladys Maria Knight entered the world on May 28, 1944, in Atlanta, Georgia, into a household held together by faith and discipline rather than comfort or stability. Her father, Merrill Woodlow Knight Sr., worked tirelessly as a postal clerk, while her mother, Sarah Elizabeth Woods, maintained order in a home where opportunity for black families in the 1940s South was painfully limited. Gladys grew up surrounded by her siblings, Brenda and Merrill Bubba Knight Jr., but the family's harmony was permanently shaken by the devastating death of her brother David Billy Knight, whose absence carved a wound that nothing, not time, not fame, would ever fully heal. That early loss created a silence in the Knight household that shaped Gladys more than any early success ever could. It was in this silence that music became her refuge. She first sang solo in church at just 4 years old, her small voice carrying a weight far beyond her years, and by 7 she was performing with the Morris Brown College Choir. That same year, she stunned the nation by winning Ted Mack's Original Amateur Hour on July 1, 1952, a moment people would remember as the first sign of her extraordinary future. Yet even that triumph came with pressure, expectations placed on a child who barely understood the world around her. Instead of playing with friends, she was rehearsing. Instead of enjoying childhood, she was carrying the dreams of an entire family. Then, in 1952, at Bubba's birthday party, the record player broke, and she and her siblings improvised a performance that changed their lives forever. What started as a moment of spontaneity became the birth of Gladys Knight and the Pips, a group that would one day define soul music. But their early years were far from glamorous. Signed to Brunswick Records in 1957, their first records failed. Rejection hit hard, especially for a girl already shaped by grief, but Gladys pushed forward, refusing to let pain silence her, that resilience would define the rest of her life, and one day become the very thing that kept her standing when everything else around her fell apart. Motown triumphs, betrayals, and the rise toward greatness. By the early 1960s, Gladys Knight and the Pips had survived enough rejection to break most young artists, but in 1961, everything changed with Every Beat of My Heart. Released first on the small Atlanta label Hunt Records and later distributed by VJ, the song climbed to number 6 on the Billboard Hot 100. It should have been their first moment of celebration, yet it only exposed them to a new kind of pain, industry exploitation. While the record soared, others pocketed the profits. The group, still barely adults, saw almost nothing. It was a harsh realization. Talent alone could not protect them from the ruthless machinery of the music business. Bobby Robinson of Fury Records stepped in and re-recorded the song, finally securing a fairer commercial footing. But the internal stability of the group faltered. In 1959, family members Brenda Knight and Eleanor Guest left to focus on their personal lives, leaving Gladys to question whether her musical journey was collapsing, just as it had begun. Only Bubba remained constant, joined later by cousins William Guest and Edward Patton. Despite the emotional toll, Gladys kept singing as if each performance were a lifeline. Then came 1966, a turning point, shadowed by both opportunity and humiliation. When they signed with Motown Records, they expected to join the ranks of Diana Ross, Marvin Gaye, and The Temptations. Instead, they were placed on the sidelines, treated as a secondary act receiving minimal promotion, smaller budgets, and little confidence from label executives, Gladys later recalled how Motown's hierarchy made them feel invisible, a painful contrast to the applause they earned on stage. Their biggest moment of contradiction came while opening for Diana Ross, and the Supremes' audiences erupted for Gladys, sometimes louder than for the headliner. What should have been validation became punishment. The group was swiftly removed from the tour, reportedly because their rising popularity upset the delicate balance of ego within Motown. It was a lesson Gladys never forgot. In an industry built on stars, brilliance could be treated as a threat. Yet she refused to be buried in the shadows. Night after night, Gladys and the Pips rehearsed relentlessly, sharpening harmonies and pushing their sound until it could no longer be ignored. That fire would soon carry them to a new label, and the greatest breakthrough of their lives. The golden era, global fame, and the personal battles behind the music. In 1973, after years of tension and underappreciation at Motown, Gladys Knight and the Pips took a risk many warned against. They walked away. They signed with Buddha Records, seeking creative freedom and financial fairness. That decision changed everything. Within months, Gladys recorded the song that would define her legacy, Midnight Train to Georgia. Released in 1973, it soared to #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 and earned a Grammy. Her voice carried exhaustion, longing, and heartbreak in a way no other singer could match. It wasn't just a hit, it was a declaration. Gladys Knight was no backup act, no understudy, no second-tier singer. She was a force. The success cascaded. I've got to use my imagination. Best thing that ever happened to me. And the Curtis Mayfield-produced soundtrack for Claudine in 1974 expanded their reign. Even as industry politics continued to challenge them in the United States, Gladys found an unexpected home overseas. In the United Kingdom, her music resonated deeply. Midnight Train to Georgia would break into the UK top 5 in 1976, 3 years after dominating U.S. charts. For Gladys, the delayed recognition felt like poetic justice. Her truth had traveled the world, even if industry gatekeepers once tried to silence it. But behind every triumph was a storm she hid from the public. The 1970s were also the years when her personal life unraveled. Her first marriage to James Newman had already collapsed under the weight of addiction and abandonment. As she toured the world with the Pips, she was also a young single mother navigating heartbreak, exhaustion, and the quiet fear of failing both as an artist and as a parent. Her second marriage to Barry Hankerson in 1974 brought brief hope, but even that blessing came wrapped in tragedy. In 1976, she gave birth to her son Shanga Ali, a child she described as her heart's joy. But by 1979, the marriage disintegrated into a bitter custody battle that drained her emotionally and financially. Then came the moment that nearly destroyed her, the abduction of her son. During the dispute, Gladys spent over $1 million searching for him. The public never knew the full extent of her terror. On stage, she delivered flawless performances. Off stage, she was a mother consumed by fear. Yet somehow, through every heartbreak, she continued to rise. The woman who once sang to survive childhood grief was now surviving adulthood's darkest storms, and the world still had no idea how much she was carrying. Addiction, broken marriages, and the spiral no one saw coming. Despite the acclaim she earned in the 1970s, the next decade brought a new kind of struggle, one that Gladys Knight kept hidden behind glamorous gowns and award-winning performances. After her painful divorce from Barry Hankerson in 1979, she tried once more to rebuild her personal life. But instead of finding comfort, she found a shadow that slowly tightened around her: gambling addiction. What began as an occasional escape turned into a dangerous dependence, as casinos offered a temporary numbness to overwhelm the loneliness and trauma that had accumulated inside her for years. The spiral was brutal. Gladys later admitted that she was losing far more than money. She was losing peace, dignity, and control. In the late 1980s, one catastrophic night at the baccarat table reportedly cost her $60,000, a moment that forced her to confront the depth of her addiction. But even then, she still performed flawlessly on stage, delivering powerhouse vocals while silently fighting an internal battle few could imagine fans saw the Empress of Soul, radiant and untouchable. They never saw the early morning hours when she left casinos exhausted and ashamed. And while she fought this private war, her third marriage, this time to motivational speaker Les Brown in 1995, crumbled almost immediately. To the public, the pairing seemed perfect. A legendary singer and a world-famous orator known for uplifting millions. But behind closed doors, miscommunication and emotional distance fractured the union beyond repair. By 1997, the marriage was over. Another relationship gone. Another scar added to a heart already heavy with old wounds. The combination of addiction, failed love, relentless pressure, and the obligations of motherhood pushed Gladys to a breaking point. But with extraordinary courage, she walked into a Gamblers Anonymous meeting and told the truth about the shame, the fear, and her determination to reclaim her life. It was the moment she began to rise again. Her faith deepened, her discipline sharpened, and she rebuilt her life step by step. Yet fate was preparing an even crueler blow, one that no meeting, no prayer, no fame could ever protect her from. The greatest tragedy of Gladys Knight's life was still to come, the loss that shattered her when a mother's heart broke beyond repair. For all the storms Gladys Knight had endured, poverty, childhood grief, failed marriages, addiction, nothing compared to the phone call she received on July 10, 1999. Her firstborn son, James Jimmy Newman III, only 36 years old, had died suddenly of heart failure. The news struck with a violence no audience applause or industry honor could soften. To the world, Gladys was a legend. To Jimmy, she had always been simply Mom. And now the child she had raised while still barely an adult herself was gone forever. Jimmy was born in 1962, at a time when Gladys was juggling teenage motherhood with the rising demands of her early music career. He grew up behind the scenes of concerts and recording studios, watching his mother transform into an icon. And despite the chaos of her marriages, the pressures of fame, and the endless travel, Gladys held fiercely to her role as his mother. Their bond was deep, imperfect, tested but unshakable. His death shattered her. Friends later recalled that Gladys, the woman who could command thousands with a single note, fell into a silence so heavy it frightened everyone around her. Music had always saved her, through abandonment, custody battles, and addiction. But this time, even her own voice felt powerless. She continued to perform, because performing was all she knew. But behind the curtains, she was broken in a way she had never been before. Nights were the worst. When the lights dimmed and the applause faded, Gladys returned to a house where her son's laughter no longer existed. She would say later that, "Some wounds never heal. You just learn to carry them." Jimmy's death was exactly that kind of wound. She carried it into every performance afterward, and audiences, whether they realized it or not, heard it. Her ballads deepened. Her gospel songs trembled with a rawness that felt almost too intimate. The pain had become part of her voice. And yet, as she had done all her life, Gladys found a way to stand again. She leaned on her faith, on her children, and on the music that had saved her since childhood. But even as she rebuilt herself, the scars of that tragedy never left her. They followed her into the next chapter of her life, a chapter filled with faith, family, and new purpose, yet shadowed by the quiet fear that time itself was beginning to run out. Faith, age, family conflict, and the quiet sadness of her final years. After the unbearable pain of losing her son, Gladys Knight found sanctuary in something she had always turned to during her darkest chapters: faith-raised Baptist, drawn later to Catholicism, she ultimately embraced the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in the late 1990s, following the spiritual path of her children. This shift was more than religion. It was survival. Through prayer, scripture, and worship, she rebuilt herself from the inside out. From that rebirth came Saints Unified Voices, the gospel choir she founded, whose debut album earned a Grammy in 2005. For Gladys, that award was not about prestige. It was proof that even grief could bloom into healing. In 2001, she married William McDowell, a man far removed from the chaos of the music industry. With him, she found the stability and companionship that had eluded her through her first 3 marriages. Together, they built a family filled with laughter, children, and grandchildren. 17 grandchildren and 10 great-grandchildren, a dynasty of love she cherished more than fame. They restored the historic Reynolds High School in North Carolina, turning a once segregated, abandoned building into a community center that offered health, education, and cultural programs. It was one of the greatest acts of service she ever gave the world. But even with this peace, the quiet sadness of age began to settle in. Now, in her 80s, every pause in touring sparks rumors. Every canceled appearance raises concern. Though she reassured the world in 2025, "I am healthy and happy," fans fear the truth hidden between the lines. The whispers grew louder when she stepped back from segments of the 2025 Queen's Tour alongside Chaka Khan, Stephanie Mills, and Patti LaBelle. Was it exhaustion? Or was time catching up with the woman who had outrun every storm life ever threw at her? Then came the family conflict. Her son Shanga, accusing her husband of wrongdoing, Gladys, stood firmly beside William, even considering legal action. To outsiders, it was heartbreaking. Even a woman who had given the world so much could not escape turmoil in her own home. Financial worries also shadowed her late years. Lawsuits involving unpaid loans linked to her son's failed restaurant business dragged her name into headlines she never wanted. For a woman who spent decades earning respect, the final chapters of her life have been marked by strain, confusion, and the quiet, aching fear that those she loves may not all stand beside her when she needs them most. Loved by millions, yet navigating storms few ever see, Gladys Knight lives her 80s with dignity, but also with a sadness that even her legendary voice can no longer hide. Gladys Knight has survived more heartbreak than most people face in a lifetime. Yet she still stands, still sings, and still inspires. Which Gladys Knight song has meant the most to you? Share your answer below. And don't forget to like and subscribe so we can bring you more stories about the legends who shaped our world.